The airport was alive with noise. People were rushing from one gate to another, their suitcases rolling behind them, squeaking across the polished floor. The loudspeaker announced flights in a mixture of calm and urgency, and the sound seemed to bounce off every wall. Babies cried in the distance, impatient and tired from long waits, while parents struggled to calm them. Some travelers argued with airline staff over delays or missed connections. There was a constant hum of footsteps, chatter, rolling luggage, the occasional loud laugh or cough that pierced through the noise. In the middle of all this chaos, a young woman moved slowly. She was not like the others who hurried through the terminal, checking their watches or tapping on their phones. Her movements were gentle, almost careful, as if she did not want to disturb the chaos that surrounded her. She had a small backpack slung over one shoulder and a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her eyes were a mix of caution and hope. Scanning the crowd, but mostly looking for a place that felt hers, she walked past cafes filled with people eating hurried meals, past charging stations where travelers sat with their heads down, glued to screens, and past benches where exhausted passengers dozed or read quietly. Then she noticed the piano. It was tucked into a quiet corner, a black upright with worn keys, tucked near a wall where few people walked. The kind of piano you might pass by without a second glance. But today, it drew her attention. She stopped and looked at it for a moment, as if seeing an old friend she had not met in a long time. Her fingers itched with the memory of playing, and a small, nervous smile appeared on her lips. She sat down slowly on the bench, unsure if she should really do this. Around her, the airport continued to roar with sound, people moving like waves, each carrying their own stress and worry. She took a deep breath and rested her hands over the keys. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from nerves. She wondered if anyone would even notice her. Some of the people passing by did glance at her, some with curiosity, some with indifference, and some with impatience. Wanting her to move because they were in a hurry, she thought about walking away. She thought about the people who would dismiss her, who might whisper and laugh at her, who might think the airport was no place for music. But then she felt something inside her shift. There was a quiet strength that came from deep within, determination to do what she loved even if the world around her did not stop. She pressed a single key, a soft, careful note. The sound was small, but clear. For a moment it was almost swallowed by the noise around her, the rolling suitcases, the announcements, the chatter. She almost stopped, doubting herself. But then she pressed another key, and another. Each note was careful at first, uncertain. She played softly, letting the music come out slowly, and then something strange happened. A few travelers turned their heads. A man with a briefcase paused for a moment, listening. A woman holding her child stopped walking and tilted her head. A boy with headphones looked up, curiosity replacing his annoyance. The music was small, but it carried a weight that made people notice. It was not loud, not flashy, but it was real. And in the midst of the chaos, it began to stand out. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds she remembered from years of practice guide her fingers. The noise around her did not disappear, but it felt different now. The loudspeaker's announcements became background noise. The rolling suitcases sounded like soft percussion. The murmurs and coughs blended into a rhythm she could work with. She let herself breathe and began to play more confidently, feeling each key, each note, each pause. Some people stopped in their tracks. A traveler carrying coffee nearly dropped it, mesmerized. Another leaned against a wall, watching, unable to tear their eyes away. The music was not complicated, not showy, but it carried a depth that made people feel something. They began to slow their pace, to listen, to let themselves be affected. For a few moments, the airport was not just a place of noise and rush. It became a space where people could pause and feel. She did not notice a security guard watching from a distance, nor the janitor who had paused sweeping. She was lost in the music, in the memory of the times she had played alone in small rooms, in the joy and the fear that had always accompanied her talent. Each note she played was like a small thread connecting her to the people around her. Whether they knew it or not, a man in a suit stopped walking and turned to face her. His phone slipped from his hand. He stood quietly, listening, letting the music wash over him. A little girl tugged at her mother's hand and pointed toward the piano wide-eyed. The mother smiled and nodded, allowing her daughter a moment to watch and listen. The music was gentle, but it carried a sense of calm that the airport had not known in hours. The young woman noticed the change in the crowd. She did not need applause or recognition. She did not even need anyone to understand what she was feeling. All she needed was the music, the connection, the way it reached out and made the chaos seem softer, more bearable. If only for a few minutes. Her hands moved faster now, more confidently, as if the piano and she were old friends catching up after years apart. Each note carried emotion, and each pause allowed people to breathe, to let the sound sink in. The baby crying in the corner stopped for a moment, curious, drawn to the sound. The parents looked up and smiled faintly. Travelers who had been rushing paused, some leaning against walls, some sitting on benches. All listening. It was not a performance. There was no audience in the traditional sense, no stage, no applause expected. It was just her, the piano, and the moment. And yet it was enough. Enough to make strangers pause. Enough to remind them that there was beauty even in the middle of noise, even in the middle of stress and hurry. As she played, a thought crossed her mind. This airport, this noisy, crowded, overwhelming place, had become something different. It had become a space where music could exist and matter even for a little while. She felt a small smile on her lips. The trembling of her hands had gone. In its place was a quiet confidence, a sense that she could make a difference. Even if only a small one, in a few lives passing by. She did not play for recognition. She did not play for fame. She played because she had to, because the music was part of her story, part of the way she connected to the world. And in that moment, the airport began to feel less like a place of chaos and more like a place of human connection. Even if fleeting, the notes flowed, soft but powerful, creating a thread through the loud hum of the airport. People moved around her, but their steps were lighter, slower. Conversations paused. Phones were put down. For a moment, the terminal was quieter, not because the noise had stopped, but because the music had changed it, and she knew that when she stopped playing, the airport would return to its usual noise and rush. But for now, she was creating a space where music, hope, and human connection could exist. For now, she was letting herself and others breathe. For now, the airport was loud, but the music was louder in its own gentle, unstoppable way. The young woman sat at the piano, her fingers still hovering over the keys after the soft melody had paused. Around her, the airport was alive with movement, but something had shifted. People were noticing her now, though not all in ways she expected. Some faces showed curiosity, a few even interest. But there were others with frowns, whispers, and impatience. Travelers who had been rushing to gates now gave her sideways glances, some shaking their heads as if to say, "This is not the place for music." Her heart beat faster. She had imagined this moment hundreds of times before, playing in crowded spaces, feeling the nervous tension in her body, and hoping someone would care. But now that it was real, the weight of all those eyes, some judging, some intrigued, some simply indifferent, pressed down on her. She wondered if she had made a mistake coming here. Maybe she should have stayed home. Maybe she should have played in a concert hall or a quiet room where her music would be appreciated. But then she took a deep breath, letting the rhythm of the airport and the rhythm of her own heartbeat guide her. She remembered why she was here. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the rare moments of pure joy she felt when her music could reach someone else. She remembered how music had always been her way of speaking when words failed, her way of connecting when she felt invisible. She pressed her hands back onto the keys, letting her fingers move cautiously at first. A few travelers stopped in their tracks, some intrigued, some skeptical. A woman carrying a stroller hesitated, glancing at the piano and then back at her child. A young man with headphones leaned against the wall, curiosity pulling him away from the music streaming in his ears. Even the janitor, who had been sweeping nearby, paused, broom in hand. Security staff walked past but slowed slightly, watching her. It was a mix of attention, judgment, and curiosity. A strange cocktail that made her stomach churn. She closed her eyes and began to play a slow, simple melody. Each note was careful, deliberate, almost shy. The music was soft, but it carried emotion. A quiet story of longing and hope. She noticed some people leaning against walls, stopping for a few seconds, drawn into the sound. Others whispered to each other, curious, surprised, questioning why someone would play in such a busy, chaotic place. A man in a business suit stopped mid-stride, phone in hand, and just listened. His eyes softened as he let the music wash over him. Nearby, a teenage girl took off her headphones and tilted her head, a faint smile forming. Even the baby that had been crying earlier was calm, eyes wide and attentive. The woman noticed the subtle effects her playing was having, and it gave her courage. She did not need approval or applause. She only needed to play. But as she continued, doubt crept back in. Some people were still frowning, some were whispering harshly. A woman passing by muttered something under her breath, probably about how inappropriate this was. A man with a rolling suitcase nearly bumped into her, huffing in irritation. She felt a knot of fear in her stomach. Was she making a mistake? Was she intruding into a world that did not want her music? The temptation to stop was strong. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that music was her voice. And this place, with all its chaos, needed something real, something human. She did not play to please everyone. She played to connect. She played because there was a part of her that refused to stay silent, even in the face of doubt and judgment. Her hands moved with more confidence now, notes flowing more naturally. The melody grew soft at first, then more expressive, carrying emotion into the space around her. The effect was subtle at first. Some travelers continued on their paths, but others paused. A man waiting near the gate lowered his newspaper, intrigued. A mother looked down at her child, noticing the change in the atmosphere. Even the security guard, who had been watching from a distance, allowed himself a small smile, recognizing the courage it took to play here in the middle of the airport's chaos. The music had begun to soften the harsh edges of the busy terminal. She felt a connection growing. Small, but tangible. With the strangers around her, it was not the kind of connection that required words. It was something deeper, something shared in the language of music. A traveler who had been frustrated with delays suddenly exhaled slowly, a subtle change in expression that told her he was listening, feeling something he had not expected as the melody continued. The young woman began to experiment with dynamics, letting her emotions guide the notes. She allowed moments of tension, pauses that made people lean forward slightly, eager to hear what would come next. She included gentle crescendos that echoed the hum of the terminal and decrescendos that softened the noise around her. Her music did not compete with the chaos. It mingled with it, shaping it, offering relief, even if only for a moment. A small crowd had started to gather. People who were not rushing to gates but choosing to pause, drawn by the music. They were a mix of travelers, a businesswoman on her phone, a teenager with a skateboard, a father and daughter eating pretzels from the snack kiosk. None of them knew each other, but they were united in this small, shared experience. Her playing created a space in the airport where strangers could be present together. If only briefly, the young woman noticed the change and felt a sense of warmth. She realized that the judgments, the frowns, the whispers were less important than the few people who had stopped to listen. They were enough. And slowly, she let herself play more freely, her fingers moving over the keys with a sense of purpose and emotion. She played with feeling, pouring her heart into the melody. Knowing that music could reach places words could not, the airport around her continued to move. But the atmosphere was different now. Travelers were calmer, steps slower, voices softer. Some were still rushing, but even they seemed lighter, almost as if the music had given them permission to breathe. She saw moments of recognition, of understanding in the eyes of strangers. It was a quiet revolution of feeling, invisible but real, even as doubt threatened to return. She focused on the faces around her, the mother and child, the man with the newspaper, the teenager with the skateboard. She thought about the moments in life when people need a pause, a reminder that beauty still exists, even amid noise and chaos. That thought gave her courage to continue, to play more deeply, to trust her instincts. Her melody began to tell a story. It spoke of hope, of fear, of quiet strength, of human resilience. She did not need to explain the story to anyone. They could feel it in their own way, through her music. The airport, with all its noise and hurry, had become a place of small miracles, and she was at the center, offering this gift to anyone willing to notice. A young man leaned against a wall, notebook in hand, and stopped scribbling to listen. A couple waiting near a gate held hands, their attention drawn to her playing. Even the janitor paused, letting the broom rest against the wall, enjoying the moment. The music was simple, but it was enough. It reminded people of humanity, of connection, of the quiet beauty that can exist even in the busiest places. The young woman felt herself relax. The tension in her shoulders eased, her hands moved more naturally, and her heart felt lighter. She realized that the moment was not about her alone. It was about the people around her, about sharing something real, something emotional, something that could reach others without words. Music had the power to transform even a chaotic airport into a place of calm, even if only for a few minutes. As she continued playing, more travelers began to notice. Some stopping to record small videos, others simply pausing, letting the music fill their minds. She did not mind the cameras or the whispers. She focused on the sound, on the feeling, on the way the music could touch hearts. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional. Each melody a thread connecting her to strangers in a way words could not. For the first time, she felt truly present. She was not worried about judgment, about the noise, or about whether people would like her music. She was simply playing, existing in the moment, offering something of herself to the world. And the world, in its own quiet way, was listening. The music continued, weaving through the airport like a gentle tide. Travelers who had been impatient now moved slower, voices quieter, steps lighter. A baby slept peacefully in a stroller. A father leaned against a pillar, eyes closed, letting the melody wash over him. A teenager smiled faintly, phone forgotten, lost in the music. Even the security guard allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Understanding the courage it took to perform here without expectation, she knew that the moment would not last forever. The airport would return to its normal chaos eventually, and people would continue on their separate paths. But for now, she had created a small space of peace, of human connection, of emotion. And that was enough. As the melody ended, she let the final note linger. Hanging in the air for a moment before fading into the background, she opened her eyes and looked around. Some travelers clapped softly, some smiled, some simply nodded in appreciation. It was not a performance for recognition or applause. It was a gift, and it had been received. The air felt lighter, the chaos less overwhelming, and for a moment, the airport was transformed. The young woman kept her hands on the keys, letting the music flow without thinking too much. She felt the rhythm of the airport, the hum of people moving, the distant rolling of luggage, and she blended it into her playing. Her melody was no longer hesitant. It was confident, expressive, and full of emotion. Each note seemed to carry a story, a message that words could not capture. She had found a rhythm in the chaos, a way to let the music reach beyond her fingers into the hearts of strangers. Around her, the airport began to change subtly. The noise was still there, the announcements still blared, travelers still hurried to their gates. But the way they moved was different. Steps slowed, voices softened, and eyes lifted from phones and newspapers. People who had been impatient moments before were now quietly pausing, letting themselves listen. The melody she played became a thread weaving through the crowd, connecting strangers in a moment of shared experience. A businessman with a briefcase leaned against a wall. His tie slightly loosened and closed his eyes. The tension in his shoulders eased as the notes reached him. Nearby, a mother holding her child stopped walking, letting the baby's eyes focus on the piano. The small crowd that had gathered before now seemed more attentive, more present. fully aware of the music that was cutting through the noise around them. She could feel it tooth a connection. The subtle change in the atmosphere. Her fingers moved faster now, creating small crescendos and decrescendos that lifted the spirit of the space. She let herself smile slightly, realizing that she was not just playing music. She was creating moments of calm and reflection. Moments that made people feel human in the middle of chaos. Even the airport staff could not help but notice. A security officer, initially watching her with a hint of suspicion, now smiled quietly as he passed. The janitor paused, leaning on his broom and letting the music soothe the fatigue of his long shift. The small changes in their expressions reminded her that music had power. Power to touch hearts even when no one expected it. She thought about how life often felt like this airport loud, chaotic, overwhelming, full of movement and distraction. And yet, in moments like this, something could emerge that made people pause, reminded them of beauty, of hope, of quiet strength. That thought gave her courage. She played each note with intention, allowing herself to fully immerse in the moment. She let her emotions guide her, letting the music tell the story she had carried for so long inside her. A teenage boy. Headphones around his neck stopped in the middle of the terminal. He looked at her with curiosity, almost disbelief, as though he could not believe someone was willing to play in such a busy, noisy place. A woman sitting at a bench near the gates quietly set her coffee down, giving herself permission to listen. A man rushing to catch a flight slowed his steps, his gaze drawn to the piano, and he allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. Her melody shifted, becoming richer, more expressive. She included small pauses, gentle notes that lingered, allowing travelers to feel each moment. She noticed the reactions of the people around her, the softened expressions, the quiet nods, the small smiles, and she realized that the music was reaching them in ways words never could. It was creating a subtle change, one person at a time, until the airport, for a brief moment, felt different. She had reached a point where she no longer noticed the doubts or whispers. She did not think about whether she was judged or dismissed. Her only focus was the music, the keys under her fingers, and the connection she could feel with those around her. Each note was intentional, each pause meaningful. Each melody, a gift she offered to the space. A little girl tugged at her mother's hand, pointing at the piano. The mother smiled and let her daughter watch, allowing the child to experience something beautiful in a place usually dominated by noise and rush. Nearby, a father adjusted his tie and stopped pacing, letting the music calm his mind. Even the people rushing past, though they did not stop, moved with a gentler step. Their annoyance softened by the melody floating through the terminal. The young woman's heart swelled with a quiet joy. She had felt doubt, fear, and judgment earlier, but now she realized that the music had created a moment of connection, a thread linking strangers through emotion. She could see it in their eyes, their expressions, the way they paused and allowed themselves to be present. It was not applause or praise that mattered, it was the impact of music on human hearts. Her fingers danced across the keys, weaving a story of hope, resilience, and quiet strength. The melody rose and fell, echoing the ups and downs of life itself. She allowed herself to play with emotion, letting the music become an extension of her spirit. She noticed the subtle changes in the crowd, the lowered voices, the attentive eyes, the soft smiles, and it encouraged her to continue, to explore the depth of the piano and to let her feelings flow freely. A man waiting for his flight lowered his newspaper, letting his eyes close for a brief moment. He exhaled slowly, the weight of stress and worry lifted, even if just for a minute. A woman nearby rested her head against a pillar, listening, tears forming quietly in her eyes. The young woman realized that the music was touching people in ways she could not see fully. Yet she felt the impact deeply. The melody grew more intricate, more expressive, capturing a range of human emotion. It spoke of hope, of fear, of longing, of joy, without a single word. She noticed the subtle reactions of travelers, the baby now quiet, teenagers smiling, the businesswoman softened, and she felt a sense of fulfillment. Her playing was no longer just a personal expression. It had become a shared experience, creating a small world within the chaos of the airport. The young woman glanced around, seeing the subtle changes in the space. The crowded terminal no longer felt overwhelming. It felt alive, vibrant, and human. People were connected, if only for a brief moment, by the music. She continued to play, her hands moving with confidence and grace, feeling a deep sense of purpose. Even the staff of the airport seemed affected. The cleaning crew paused briefly, letting the melody reach them. A security officer walked past but slowed, listening, and a small smile touched his face. She realized that music had the ability to soften the hardest moments, to create human connection, and to bring calm to chaos. It was a quiet power, but it was profound. The melody continued, weaving through the airport, blending with the hum of voices, footsteps, and announcements. It did not compete with the noise. It complemented it, offering relief, comfort, and emotion. Travelers were no longer just passing through. They were experiencing something real, something that transcended schedules, delays, and stress. She noticed the subtle reactions of the people around her, the father gently holding his daughter's hand, the young woman smiling softly, the teenager leaning against a wall, lost in thought. The music was touching them in ways she could not fully see, yet she felt it in the energy of the space. In the small moments of attention and pause, the young woman continued to play, fully immersed in the music. She had overcome her doubts and fears, letting the melody guide her. Each note carried emotion, each pause created space, and each phrase connected her to strangers in the terminal. She realized that music was not just sound. It was a bridge between people, a way to reach hearts without words. The airport, still busy and noisy, had become a place of subtle transformation. The music had softened the edges of chaos, offering travelers a moment to breathe, to feel, and to connect. The young woman played with intention, knowing that the impact of her music went beyond what she could see. It was enough to know that she had reached someone, touched someone, created a shared human experience. As her melody reached its peak, she let herself feel the joy of connection. She had faced doubt, judgment, and fear, but now she was playing freely, confidently, and fully present. The airport was no longer just a place of noise and rush. It had become a space of emotion, reflection, and connection. Finally, she allowed the music to gently fade, each note lingering before disappearing. The airport returned slightly to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Travelers moved with softer steps, quieter voices, and lighter hearts. They had been touched by something real, something human, something that reminded them of beauty in the middle of chaos. She sat back, hands resting on her lap, breathing deeply. Her heart was full. She realized that her music had done more than fill the air. It had created a moment of humanity, a pause in the rush, a connection that could not be measured by applause or attention. It was a quiet victory, a small but meaningful triumph of emotion over chaos, of connection over isolation, of music over noise. The young woman kept her hands lightly on the keys, her eyes half closed, listening to the sound she was creating. The airport was still busy. The loudspeaker announcements continued. Suitcases rolled across the floor, and travelers hurried by. Yet something had shifted. Her music had brought a quiet pause, a moment of calm in the middle of chaos. The melody she played now was deeper, richer, more expressive than before, and the crowd that had gathered slowly began to grow, not by numbers alone, but by attention and feeling. People had stopped for a few moments earlier, but now they lingered, moved by the emotion of her playing. A woman seated near the gate clasped her hands together, letting the music fill her thoughts and quiet her worries. A man waiting for a delayed flight rested his chin on his hand, closing his eyes to absorb every note. Even the baby in the stroller, who had cried earlier, now watched her hands on the piano keys with fascination, and for a moment seemed to understand the beauty unfolding. She played softly, letting each note breathe, allowing the natural pauses to resonate. She was no longer afraid of the whispers or skeptical glances she had worried about before. The small crowd had become a silent audience, not expecting a concert, but receiving a gift. Each chord she struck seemed to tell a story of hope, of quiet strength, of resilience in the midst of noise and disorder. The music itself became a bridge, connecting strangers who had never met but now shared a moment together. As she continued, she became aware of small reactions in the audience. A teenager leaned against a wall, lost in thought, a smile slowly spreading across his face. A father reached down to brush his child's hair, feeling calm in a way he hadn't before. Travelers who had been stressed and impatient were now breathing more easily, their hurried movements softened by the melody. Some had stopped completely, allowing themselves to stand or sit quietly, letting the music fill their senses. The young woman's fingers danced across the keys, weaving a story that transcended words. She had always loved the piano, not just for its sound, but for the way it could carry emotion, for the way it could speak when words were not enough. She remembered times when she had played alone, letting the music express her feelings when no one could hear. But now, in this bustling airport, she was not alone. Her music was reaching people, touching them in ways she could not fully see, yet felt deeply. Even the airport staff were noticing. A security officer leaned against a column, listening with a quiet smile. The janitor paused his work, broom in hand, eyes soft as he absorbed the melody. Travelers who had been moving with frustration and impatience now seemed lighter. Their expressions softened and their movements slowed. For a few moments, the airport became a shared space of emotion, connection. In human presence, she played with intention, letting her hands tell the story of her journey, of the challenges she had faced, the fears she'd overcome, and the moments of joy she had cherished. The melody rose and fell, capturing the complexity of human emotion without needing a single word. She allowed herself to feel every note, every pause, letting the music flow naturally, and in doing so, she created a ripple of calm and reflection that spread through the crowd. A woman carrying a stroller watched quietly, her eyes softening as she felt the music. She held her baby close, sharing a brief moment of calm and connection. Nearby, a businessman lowered his newspaper, closing his eyes for a moment as the music reached him. A young girl tugged at her mother's hand, pointing at the piano, and the mother smiled, letting her daughter experience the moment fully. Each person responded in their own way, but the effect was the same. The music had drawn them together. Offering a sense of peace and presence, the young woman felt a sense of fulfillment she had not experienced before. She had worried about judgment, about whispers, about the bustling chaos around her. But now she realized that the music itself was enough. It was enough to reach hearts, to touch emotions, to create connection. It was not about applause or recognition. It was about the shared human experience that music could create, even in the middle of a noisy, crowded airport. As she continued to play, the melody became more intricate, exploring new emotions, delicate nuances that made listeners pause and reflect. She allowed herself to play with abandon, letting the music carry her through the terminal. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful, each phrase an offering to the strangers who had stopped to listen. She felt a quiet joy in knowing that her music was making a difference. However small in the lives of people she had never met, the crowd that had gathered remained quiet, attentive, and present. Travelers were no longer rushing blindly. They were participating in a shared moment of human connection. Even those who had been skeptical at first were now softened, their faces showing curiosity, wonder, and appreciation. The music had changed the atmosphere, transforming the terminal into a place where people could pause, breathe, and feel. She noticed the subtle changes in the expressions of those around her. A mother smiled at her child, a man exhaled slowly, releasing tension, and a teenager leaned back against the wall, smiling faintly. The airport, usually a place of stress, rush, and noise, had become a space of quiet reflection, a place where music could touch hearts and create a sense of shared humanity. The young woman's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, each chord building upon the last, creating a tapestry of sound that was both delicate and powerful. She played with confidence, letting the music express the depth of her feelings and the beauty of the moment. The melody captured hope, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from overcoming doubt and fear. She realized that the music was not just about her. It was about the people around her, about creating a moment of connection and emotion in the midst of chaos. She could see it in their eyes, their expressions, their body language. The music had touched them in ways words could not, and in that realization, she felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. A man waiting for his flight leaned against a column, his closed, listening intently. A woman with a stroller allowed her baby to watch, sharing the calm and beauty of the music. Travelers who had been frustrated and impatient now moved with lighter steps. Their voices softened, their stress eased. The young woman understood that music had the power to transform, to heal, to connect, and she played with renewed passion and focus. Her melody continued to weave through the terminal, blending with the natural sounds of the airport, not competing, but complementing them. The music became a part of the space, a thread connecting strangers, creating a shared experience that was fleeting yet profound. Each note carried emotion, each pause created space for reflection, and each chord strengthened the invisible bond between the pianist and her audience. The young woman felt herself completely immersed in the music, fully present in the moment. She no longer worried about judgment, noise, or chaos. She played because she loved it, because it was her way of connecting, and because she knew that even a small ripple of beauty could have a meaningful impact on those who paused to listen. She played for the travelers, the airport staff, the children, the parents, the students, the businessmen, the strangers passing by. She played for everyone who needed a moment of calm, a reminder of beauty, and a connection to something human. The music flowed naturally, with emotion, intention, and grace, filling the terminal with a sense of peace and presence. As the final notes lingered in the air, the young woman paused, allowing the sound to fade gradually. The airport returned slightly to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Travelers moved with softer steps, quieter voices, and lighter hearts. They had been touched by something real, something human, something that reminded them of beauty in the middle of chaos. She sat back, breathing deeply, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having shared something meaningful. Her music had reached hearts, transformed moments, and created a connection that transcended language and circumstance. For a few fleeting minutes, the airport had become a place of calm, reflection, and human connection. And she knew that those moments, though small, could leave a lasting impression on the people who had listened. The young woman slowly lifted her hands from the keys, letting the final notes hang in the air for a moment before fading completely. The airport, filled with people moving in hurried chaos just minutes before, seemed to pause in the aftermath of her music. Travelers lingered where they stood, almost reluctant to return fully to the noise. The announcements, the rolling suitcases, and the busy schedule that waited for them. The gentle echo of her final chord seemed to hang over the crowd, a reminder that even a fleeting moment of calm could leave a lasting impression. Around her, the reactions were varied, yet all touched by the music in some way. A mother quietly kissed her child on the forehead, smiling softly as she felt the lingering warmth of the melody. A man in a business suit let out a deep breath, tension releasing from his shoulders for the first time in hours. A young girl still held her mother's hand, eyes wide and reflecting the wonder she had just witnessed. Even travelers who had not stopped to listen seemed affected in subtle ways. Their steps were softer, their voices lower, their expressions calmer. The young woman sat for a moment, letting herself absorb the atmosphere. She had played without expectation, without thought of recognition or reward, and yet the impact was undeniable. She could feel the quiet energy of connection that had formed between strangers, a shared understanding that life could hold beauty even amid chaos. In that instant, she understood that her music had done more than fill the air. It had reached into hearts, leaving a mark that could not be measured by claps or words. She rose from the piano slowly, her fingers brushing the keys one last time, as if saying goodbye to a friend. Travelers began to murmur softly, sharing looks and whispers, smiles passing from person to person. A few people clapped quietly, not in loud celebration, but in sincere acknowledgement of the gift they had received. Some reached for their phones, snapping a picture or recording a short video. Wanting to capture the memory of this unexpected moment of humanity, the young woman felt a mixture of relief and quiet pride. She had faced her fears and doubts, played in a place where judgment was possible. And yet she had stayed true to herself and her music. Her presence had changed the atmosphere of the terminal, if only for a short while. She realized that the moment was not about her alone. It was about the people around her. The travelers who had experienced a pause, a connection, and the chance to feel something real amid the noise of daily life. She walked slowly through the terminal, noticing the subtle changes in the travelers around her. Conversations were softer, smiles were more frequent, and the energy of the crowd had shifted. Even those who had not stopped to listen seemed lighter, as if the music had left an invisible thread that connected them to a shared experience. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had contributed something meaningful, even if fleeting, to the lives of strangers. A young boy pointed to the piano and tugged at his mother's sleeve, excited to see the instrument that had created such a captivating sound. The mother smiled and nodded, letting her child linger for a moment before continuing their path. A father leaned down to adjust his daughter's backpack, still holding a soft smile. The weight of impatience and stress eased by the music he had just heard. Travelers who had been annoyed by delays now moved with a calmness that was rare in such a crowded space. The music had left a trace of humanity that lingered beyond the notes themselves. The young woman felt a sense of gratitude as she observed the reactions around her. She realized that she had not only played music, but had created a space for connection, reflection, and emotion in an environment that rarely allowed for such experiences. The airport, a place of noise, stress, and hurry, had become for a few precious moments a place of calm, a place where strangers could share a human experience through the language of music. She thought about the travelers who had stopped to listen, the children who had paused in curiosity, the adults who had allowed themselves to be moved, and even those who had merely walked past, their expressions softened in subtle ways. She understood that her music had touched each person differently, yet the impact was universal in its ability to connect and heal, even briefly. The joy of that realization filled her with warmth, a quiet happiness that could not be